Welcome to CSP 383, Chapter 7, Educational, Psychological, and Behavioral Characteristics, Part 2. In the first part, we talked about educational characteristics, and we talked about psychological characteristics. In this part, we're going to talk about behavioral characteristics and adaptive behavior. So when we talk about behavioral characteristics, where we're going to start is we're going to start talking about behavior and developmental disabilities in general. So here are some of the characteristics we find of individuals with developmental disabilities. The first characteristic is rigidity. People with developmental disabilities tend to like routine. They don't like change. They tend to be what you'd call set in their ways. They will be argumentative. They will be resistant to anything that doesn't fit the pattern of behavior that they're used to having. And so as a teacher, one of the things you have to do is prepare them for change and not necessarily explain why you're going to do it, but explain what you're going to do and how things are going to be different. The next one is aggression. Now, this is not true of all kids with developmental disabilities, but it is a fairly common trait that children with developmental disabilities are going to be aggressive. Part of that is tied to the rigidity. Part of it is just an internal characteristic. Another characteristic is impulsivity, thinking without acting. Did I just say that backwards? Acting without thinking. And so what happens is that for a person with developmental disability, they're fairly easily persuaded to do things that are not appropriate because they don't think about the implications of what they're going to do. They don't think in terms of cause and effect, that I better not do this because if I do this will happen. If it sounds good, they'll do it. Next characteristic, by very definition, people with developmental disabilities have problems with immaturity. They act like they're younger than they are because developmentally they are younger than they are. And so very often you'll see kids with developmental disabilities hanging out with kids younger than they are. The next one is emotional lability. Now, lability has to do with mood swings. So for kids with mild developmental disabilities, they will go from laughter to tears in 5 minutes. They'll go from being very, very sad to very, very happy very, very quickly. And so if you're working with kids with developmental disabilities, then you go through a lot of emotional turmoil during the day. Not just negative emotion, but positive emotion. So they'll be very, very happy. They'll be very, very sad. They'll be mad. They'll be laughing, just a whole range of emotions. And it feels very much as a teacher, it feels like you're just going through a whirlwind all day, every day. Another characteristic is social misperception. And this goes back to the concept development that we talked about on the first film when we talked about this idea of them having trouble with understanding concepts. We said they had problems with comprehension and they had problems with concepts of knowing how something is like something else. And then we also, in the first film, we talked about the idea of self-regulation. And so what we're finding is that for children with developmental disabilities, they have trouble with the idea of knowing when things are personal and when things are not. And so when someone says something to them, they will misinterpret the person's tone of voice, they'll misinterpret their body language, and because they tend to be aggressive, then they're going to assume that other people are also aggressive. The next thing that your book talks about is dual diagnosis. Now, if you go online for this, you're going to get a little bit confused because dual diagnosis typically is talking about people who have drug addiction and mental illness. What your book is talking about is somebody who has a developmental disability and mental illness. And so what they're talking about is the idea that just because a person has limited cognitive ability does not mean that they can't have mental illness too. So a person can have limited cognitive ability and have problems with depression. They can have limited cognitive ability and have problems with bipolar disorder or even schizophrenia. When I was teaching at junior high level, we had a special ed director that kept saying to us that a child who had a diagnosis of mental retardation, which is what we were calling it in those days, could not have a diagnosis of emotionally disturbed. Well, within a couple of years, that understanding changed completely. So about a third of the kids that I taught had a dual diagnosis. They were diagnosed as having what we in those days called educable mental retarded, what we would now call a mild intellectual disability, IQ below 70. But they also had some form of emotional disturbance. For most of them, it was aggressive disorders, although we had a couple who had problems with anxiety and withdrawal. So the next thing we look at is stereotypical behavior. Now, stereotypical behavior, very often when people see what we're going to call stereotypical behavior, they think of autism, because these are characteristics that you see in autism. But we also see these characteristics in children who have more significant intellectual disabilities. So what we're talking about in stereotypical behavior are things like hand flapping, spinning, twirling, flicking their fingers up and down, spinning in circles. It's behavior that does not seem to have any particular purpose. And very often it's called self-stimming or self-stimulating, because the only purpose it seems to have is that the person's brain needs some input from somewhere. So the first video I'm going to show you is of a child without a disability doing what we call stereotypical behavior. And it's really important for you to see this, because what you need to understand is that we all do it. This child is just standing watching some animals, and while she's doing that, she's bouncing up and down. She's got a tune inside her head, and she's moving. Very typical of children this age who do not have a disability. But we also see it more typically of kids with autism and kids with significant developmental disabilities. So here's a kid with autism, and see if you can tell what the difference is.
What do you want? What do you want? Do you want it in? In? Can you tell me ready? Ready? Good. Okay, I'm going to throw it to you this time. Ready? No, your turn.
So in the first video, what you see is the child was unengaged. She was watching the elephants, but it was not enough to fully keep her attention, and so her neurology just seemed to need some movement. In the second film, the child with autism, and this would also be true of kids with more significant disabilities, what you see is that his self-stimming is even when he's being asked to do a task. The next film is on self-injurious behavior.
James, hey! No, Jamie! Hey.
Now, I know that film is a little bit disturbing. What we find is that many kids with significant developmental disabilities will have what we call self-injurious behavior or self-abusive behavior. In that film, you saw a young man who was beating himself on the head so much that they actually put his hands in boxing gloves so that it would diminish the blows. We had a young man in Rosedale some years back who would hit himself on the side of the face to the point where he had a big purple bruise on the side of his face all the time. We had a kid in Lee County who chewed his fingers to the point where they were just bloody stumps. And I know that's distressing to hear about this. We're not sure how it is that self-stimming becomes self-injurious. We know that there are some kinds of developmental disabilities where the neurology just seems to go haywire and the person seems to be compelled to hurt themselves. There are other kids that we wonder whether they have the same pain sensations as other people. We're just not really sure. And the last characteristic under behavioral characteristics has to do with interpersonal relationships. When you have a significant disability, what happens sometimes is that people are only close to you because they're family or because they're paid to be. And so there's this concept of a circle of friends, that circle one are the people closest to you, the people that you love. Circle two are people you really like, but they're not close enough for circle one. Circle three are people that you like or do things with. Circle four are people that are paid to know you. And what we find is that for kids with disabilities, very often they're missing circle 2 and 3. They have circle 1, which is their family, and they have circle 4, people that are paid to be around them. And so part of what we have to do with kids with disabilities is to make sure that they get some circle 2 and circle 3 people in their lives. The last section that we have is adaptive behavior. And when we're talking about adaptive behavior, what we're talking about is what's called a functional life skills curriculum. The idea that where we live as an adult is in the leisure world, at work, in the community, and at home. And so what can we do to make sure that people with disabilities have those opportunities?
People choose all sorts of leisure activities. Jane likes to walk through the park. It's how she relaxes. Mick likes to play video games. He likes the excitement and noise. Luke and Jacob enjoy gardening. It's fun for them to get outside and dig in the dirt. Rita has been skateboarding lately. She wants to get even better at it. Tracy likes to dance. She loves to move to the music. All these activities are leisure. These people do them in their free time. Because they want to. My choice. And they have fun doing them. My thing. Devin works to earn money. Money to buy food and pay the rent. He also helps out with chores around the house. But when he's done, Devin likes to take a break with his friends. For Devin, free time is as important as work itself. Free time gives him the opportunity to rest from work and to have some fun. Learning about leisure helps you think about fun things to do. That's right, new ideas. New leisure options. Activities you hadn't thought of before. New things to try. Things you might like. Instead of doing the same old thing, choosing something new. Having more options can help you have fun with other people. Or give you ideas for having fun when you're alone. First, you'll explore what activities interest you. Then, you'll learn how to expand your choices to think of new things you might like to try. You'll learn how to find great leisure opportunities right where you live. Learning how to take part in them and how to deal with things that get in the way.
So this is chapter 7. Hope this helped, and you can look at the other materials in your book and get ready for your test.